Rising from the ashes, when love becomes a battlefield. Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, who is that person staring back at me? Not in some philosophical way, but in that gut wrenching moment when you realize you've become unrecognizable to yourself. I recently had the profound honor of interviewing Jenny Hedouville, a fearless truth teller whose work has quite literally saved lives. Jenny doesn't just illuminate the path forward for survivors of narcissistic abuse, she walks beside them, holding lanterns in the darkest corners of human experience. Her insights form the foundation of what I'm sharing today, and her courage in breaking silence around these experiences deserves our deepest respect and admiration. The mirror moment I mentioned, it happens to thousands of women every day. Women who enter relationships full of hope only to find themselves slowly disappearing, piece by piece, smile by smile, dream by dream. The tragedy isn't just that it happens, it's that when it does, most women don't even have language for what they're experiencing. Let me tell you about Grace. For 17 years, let that sink in. 17 years, she lived with a covert narcissist, a man who, to friends and family, appeared to be the model husband, attentive, charming, successful, but behind closed doors, he was systematically dismantling her sense of self with surgical precision. When Grace experienced postpartum depression after their child was born, instead of support, she received isolation. When she needed connection, she got gaslighting. You're being dramatic, he'd say. No one wants to be around you when you're like this. When she voiced needs, she heard how she was too much, too emotional, too demanding, too everything. And here's the thing about emotional abuse that makes it so insidious, it doesn't leave visible bruises. There's no cast on your arm for coworkers to sign, no black eye for your mother to gasp at, just this hollow feeling that somehow everything wrong in your relationship is your fault. A feeling that burrows so deep it becomes part of your internal architecture. Maybe if I were just better, Grace would think, more patient, more understanding, more, less. Does that sound familiar to anyone? That voice that suggests if you just tried harder, loved deeper, complained less, then maybe you'd be worthy of basic dignity and respect. The most painful part of Grace's story isn't the abuse itself. It's that for years she didn't even know there was a name for what was happening to her. She thought this was just marriage, just life, just her cross to bear. The gaslighting was so effective that she lost the ability to trust her own perceptions. But here's where her story takes a turn that still gives me chills. One night, while her husband was asleep, Grace opened her laptop and typed, "Why does my husband make me feel crazy?" That Google search, that small act of curiosity and defiance, changed everything. She discovered the term covert narcissism and suddenly had language for her experience, words for her wounds. And then she did something extraordinary, something that would eventually save her life. She enrolled in a master's program. Secretly, she studied when he wasn't home. She built knowledge while he was busy building walls around her. She planted seeds of her future freedom while he thought she was safely contained. Education became her rebellion. Learning became her lifeline. When Jenny Hedouville shared this story with me, I was struck by how often liberation begins with a whisper, not a dramatic exit, not a screaming match, just a quiet decision. This cannot be all there is. Now let's talk about Jen Ann. Her story takes a different path, but arrives at a similar destination. Jen Ann's narcissistic partner was a master at what therapists call triangulation, turning friends and family against her. One by one, her support system crumbled as he poisoned relationships, twisted her words, and painted her as unstable. The isolation was so complete that Jenan began to believe she deserved the treatment she received. That's the terrible magic of narcissistic abuse. It convinces you that you're the problem, that you're lucky anyone tolerates you at all. But Jenan discovered something powerful: tiny acts of self reclamation. When her husband was away, she would reconnect with a friend. She would write in a journal. She would stand in front of the mirror and practice saying no to her reflection. Small rebellions, quiet revolutions. These seemingly insignificant acts were actually profound statements of self worth, planted like seeds in barren soil. And here's what both Grace and Jen Ann discovered, what Jenny Hedouville's work so powerfully illuminates. Healing doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in thousands of tiny choices to remember who you were before the abuse began. I want to pause here and acknowledge something important. These stories might sound extreme to some of you. You might be thinking, I would never stay in a relationship like that. Can I gently suggest that this thought, this very natural thought, is part of why narcissistic abuse thrives in silence? Because we believe we're too smart, too strong, too self aware to be manipulated this way. But narcissistic abuse doesn't start with control, it starts with charm, with love bombing, with being seen so completely that it feels like coming home. The control comes later, so gradually you barely notice the temperature rising until you're already boiling. Let me share one more story that Jenny Hedouville discussed in our interview. This one centers on a woman who found herself in an abusive relationship after experiencing widowhood. Having already endured profound loss, she believed this new relationship was divinely ordained, a second chance at happiness. When the mask dropped and the abuse began, her pain was compounded by spiritual shame. I should have known better, she told herself. God showed me the red flags and I ignored them. Her healing journey wasn't just about escaping the relationship. It was about escaping the shame that followed her out the door. She had to reclaim not just her sense of self, but her spiritual identity. To believe she was worthy of love, both human and divine, despite having been deceived. She found her way forward by eventually sharing her story publicly, turning her pain into purpose by helping other women recognize warning signs she had missed. In doing so, she discovered that vulnerability, the very thing her abuser had exploited, could become her greatest strength. This is the paradox at the heart of healing from narcissistic abuse. The qualities that made you vulnerable to manipulation, your empathy, your willingness to see the best in others, your capacity for forgiveness, are the same qualities that will ultimately save you. Not by directing them outward at someone who will never appreciate them, but by turning them inward. Can you imagine what might happen if you loved yourself with the same fierce loyalty you've shown to someone who diminished you? If you extended yourself the same grace, the same benefit of the doubt, the same endless second chances? I know what you're thinking. Easier said than done. And you're right. When you've been told repeatedly that your perceptions are wrong, that your feelings are excessive, that your needs are burdensome, trusting yourself again feels like learning to walk after a devastating injury. But here's what Jenny Hedouville's work reveals: it's possible. Not just possible, it's happening every day. Women are waking up, they're setting boundaries, They're saying no without apology. They're choosing themselves, often for the first time in years, and they're discovering something miraculous in the process, that the strength they thought was broken was merely dormant. I want to speak directly now to anyone listening who recognizes themselves in these stories. First, I want you to know that you are not crazy. The confusion you feel is by design. The self doubt is a feature of the abuse, not a flaw in your character. Second, I want you to know that healing is not linear. You will have days of clarity followed by days of fog, moments of determination followed by moments of doubt. This doesn't mean you're failing at recovery, it means you're human. And third, perhaps most importantly, I want you to know that the journey back to yourself is worth every difficult step. The woman you were before the abuse began, she's still in there waiting, hoping, believing in you, even when you've stopped believing in yourself. For Black women, especially, and Jenny Hedouville emphasized this point powerfully in our conversation. The journey carries additional complexities. In communities where strength is celebrated and vulnerability can be mistaken for weakness, admitting you've been abused can feel like confirming a stereotype or betraying cultural expectations. But here's the truth: recognizing abuse isn't weakness, setting boundaries isn't selfishness. Choosing yourself is an abandonment of your community. It's the first step towards showing up for others as your full, authentic self. As one survivor put it, I thought leaving meant I wasn't strong enough to endure. Now I realize staying would have meant I wasn't brave enough to heal. So what now? What do we do with these stories, these insights, this understanding of narcissistic abuse and its devastating impacts? We break the silence. We name what happened to us. We refuse to carry shame that was never ours to bear. We extend compassion to ourselves and to others walking similar paths. And we remember that the most revolutionary act in a world that tries to diminish us is to take up space unapologetically, to reclaim our voices, our boundaries, our dreams, to insist on being seen not as we were told we should be, but as we truly are. Today, I challenge you to take one step, just one, toward reclaiming your worth. Maybe it's researching narcissistic abuse. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend you've lost touch with. Maybe it's simply standing in front of the mirror and saying, I deserve better, because you do. You absolutely do. And the world needs you. Not the diminished version someone else created, but the full, vibrant, authentic you, the you that existed before anyone told you to be less, the you that's waiting to rise from these ashes stronger and more beautiful than before. The journey back to yourself isn't just personal, it's political. It's revolutionary. It's world changing. Because when we refuse to be silenced, when we insist on our own humanity in the face of dehumanization, we create ripples that extend far beyond our individual lives. So rise, heal, speak, live, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Not just for yourself, but for every woman who will find courage in your courage, strength in your strength, hope in your healing. The world is waiting for you to reclaim your power. And when you do, when we all do, nothing will ever be the same again.